Howdy, folks. You are listening to the Doc Owen Show. This is Dr. Richard Owen, and Miss Ima Surefire is in the house. Say hello, Ima.
Howdy, folks. How y'all doing?
Welcome back or welcome aboard. As you probably know, but just in case you don't, we are all over the social media as Doc Owen Show. All one word, DOCOWENSHOW. So ping us, like us, follow us, poke us, zap us, tell your friends about us, whatever. Reach out and tell us what you think. We would appreciate it. Or if you want a direct line, you can always email us at either Ima, I-M-A, at docowenshow.com or doc at docowenshow.com. Before we go much further, we'd like to pay recognition to and to give a little shout out to our affiliate stations on the Red State Talk Radio Network. Ima will lead it off with everything east of the Mississippi, and then I'll do the stations west of the Mississippi. Take it away, madam.
Okay. The first is WDDQ, FM 92.1, Adele, Georgia. WSFB, 1490 AM. Talk, 97.7 FM in Quitman, Georgia. WJNW AM 1650 in Hermitage, Tennessee. WMQL Radio FM 105.5 in Brevard, North Carolina. And Tax Pro Radio in Gainesville, Georgia.
And west of the Mississippi, we have Talk Radio AM 1620 KTFL in Gilbert, Arizona. And right here in Texas, the Kaufman County Talk Radio AM 1680 KCTR up in Terrell, Texas. Looks like we need to do a little bit of work on stations west of the Mississippi, I think.
Looks that way.
We have a really exciting show ahead with a lot to cover, so let's get started in our traditional manner. Ima will provide an inspirational quote, and I'll do one or two leadership quotes. Ima, take it away.
And tonight's quote comes from Confucius. He was a Chinese teacher, editor, politician, and philosopher of the spring and autumn period of Chinese history. And his quote is, "Study the past if you would divine the future." And I'll be honest, I had to look up what divine meant in this particular quote. And back in the day, it meant predict.
Thanks, Ima. Tonight's leadership quote is from our friends at Crowned Grace International. It's from a lady by the name of Susan Cain. She is an American author, and interestingly enough, she has written a book called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. I guess I'm going to have to get a copy of that and read up on it. The quote is, "There is zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas." It reminded me of the current political environment with all the campaign rhetoric and the ideas that are coming out of it versus the talkers that are delivering it. Normally, right about here, we would go into a couple of hot items and then hear from Uncle Botchie's with Uncle Botchie's Brief, our historian on the Doc Owen Show. But it's Thanksgiving week. Uncle Botchie's at home in the kitchen, I'm sure, whipping up some Thanksgiving spaghetti and meatballs for the clan. So we're just going to dive into a show that I did in 2013, actually, after I had started the Doc Owen Show on September the 9th of 2013. Thanksgiving was the first holiday that we ran into. So if you'll have to pardon the references to Thanksgiving Eve, because at that time I was broadcasting on a Wednesday night. But it's the historical information that's included in the show that I wanted you to have. And rather than repeat it, although you're going to hear it when I had a cold, unfortunately, that night, but the show must go on, so we did it. I think that the information that's included is extremely important from a historical perspective for both Thanksgiving as well as the United States of America. And it goes right in line with what we've been having Uncle Bocce deliver. So enjoy the show. Again, it's pre-recorded Thanksgiving Eve of 2013, and I will be back when it's over to say goodnight. And by the way, the intro to the show at that time was from my friends at the world's greatest God and country rock and roll band, Madison Rising. So as soon as that's over, we'll flip into the show. Enjoy the clip from their song Before the Hyphens Came. Thank you. Howdy, folks. This is Doc Owens. It is Thanksgiving Eve, Wednesday night, the 26th of November. I know that the it's the 27th. Got to set my watch. The announcer gave you the phone numbers. Ignore those for this show only. Here's why. I told you last week that this would be a recorded message. We would do some history of Thanksgiving, and unlike the current administration, I have done what I said I would do. This is a recorded message. So there won't be anybody there to answer the phones. I'm going to try not to throw out controversial issues so that you will be prompted to call. This is Thanksgiving Eve. You should be in the kitchen or finished in the kitchen and sitting in front of a fire, reading a book, taking a break. That's what this is about. So that's the reason I recorded it, so I could join you in those festivities on Wednesday night. I did what I want to do and trained to do, and that is research Thanksgiving. I obviously went to Wikipedia. I'll give you some information from there. I went to ask.com. I did you may not be familiar, but in addition to the standard Google search, there is a search called Google Scholar, and that gives you what are called peer-reviewed articles. In other words, it's writings by usually other PhDs for PhDs. It's extremely verbose, but they've done the research, they have the references, their information has been reviewed by other PhDs before it is published, so it's considered to be a little more accurate, considerably more accurate than hearsay or than CNN or Today or unfiltered information that you get. So I have an article that we will probably close with that is from a peer-reviewed article that I found extremely interesting. I hope you will find it the same. It will tie all the previous information that I'm going to give to you together. We all know from a family perspective what Thanksgiving is. I hope that to be a true statement. This entire show is going to assume that that is a true statement. It's a family gathering. It's a time that everybody puts an awful lot of issues aside and sits down to have conversations about bigger issues and things that go on in life and not get caught up in the petty day-to-day activities. It is technically a day to give thanks for originally the bounty that was provided in terms of the harvest. However, it actually started as a day to give thanks for any major event, a major victory on a battlefield,
the coming of a rain after a long drought. In other words, Thanksgiving Day was set aside or called upon on numerous occasions for numerous events. In approximately, according to the history books, 1621 in the United States, the first Thanksgiving Day was held between the Pilgrims and the Indians. And most of you know that was in Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. There are two accounts for that I will go over, one of which is the story that you know. It was a bountiful harvest that the Pilgrims had brought in. They felt the need to thank their Indian hosts who had helped them bring in such a good bounty. So they had a big feast, and everybody brought something to the feast. There were, all accounts that I read, always used the same number, which I find interesting. There were 58 Pilgrims and 90 Indians at that first event. There were two of those Indians that actually spoke English, that had been put into slavery by the Spaniards at one point in time and by the French. And so but in the course of that, they learned to speak English because they had to go through England to get there. They were sold into slavery in those countries, but actually captured by British and taken over there. So that made it a little bit easier to communicate for the people that landed in the Massachusetts area. So a little known fact that I wasn't aware of. Let me read to you from an article, the bit that I found in Wikipedia. The event that Americans commonly call the first Thanksgiving was celebrated by the Pilgrims after their first harvest in the New World in 1621. This feast lasted 3 days and was attended by, I misstated, so now I am like the administration. There were 53 Pilgrims. I said there were 58, my bad, and 90 American Indians. The New England colonists were accustomed to regularly celebrating Thanksgivings, in quotes, days of prayer, thanking God for blessings such as military victory or the end of a drought. So this was nothing new to them. Further on in that article, it states that historically, none of these had any influence over the evolution of the modern United States holiday. The American holiday's true origin was this New England Calvinist Thanksgiving. Never coupled with a Sabbath meeting, the Puritan observances were special days set aside during the week for thanksgiving and praise in response to God's providence. It's very much was originally tied to religion. Not a religion in general. That's the last article that I want to read to you that I hope you find as interesting as I did. There it is. So we go from 1621, where basically the players were the governor and the wife of the governor and two English-speaking Indians. There's something, if you go out there and Google, you'll find a thing called The First Thanksgiving by Terrell Smith. And it's a little one-act play that's kind of interesting, that talks about how that particular sect of folks that came over here had fled England because of English persecution. They went to Holland. Because of religious persecution. They went to Holland where they had religious freedom, but they didn't necessarily have economic freedom. So they blew out of Holland again in order to get their religious freedom. And one of the things I also learned as a part of doing this reading was that the first Pilgrims that came over here, the 1621 group, up until about 1623, operated their particular part of the country as a commune. They were communist. They believed that everybody worked and all of the harvest went into a big bucket and was divided out evenly. That didn't work too well. They found that it just didn't work, that some people got lazy, some people didn't work at all, others did all they could. It just didn't it didn't make everybody as happy as they thought it would. So they changed that to basically what we know as free enterprise. The government still owned the land, but each person was given a specific parcel upon which to do their own growing and out of which they could keep what they got. And that worked out very much better and has continued till this day. That's exactly how it works. And even to the point that the government owns the land, that's why you pay taxes, is to maintain the right to work that land. You can resell the land, you can do things with it, but there are always taxes that are paid to the government for the use of the land. So that was just a little aside that came up during all of this research. Let me read to you what I found. I think it came out of my peer review stuff. It's called Thanksgiving Day, A True History. How are we doing on time? Okay. Before I dive into this, so it'll flow a little better when I get back, let's take our standard quarter-hour break, and I'll be back in a minute. Thanks. Howdy, folks. This is Daco, and welcome back. Hope you didn't get so engrossed in the show and burn the cookies or the dressing, so pay attention. This is our Thanksgiving Day review, our Thanksgiving celebration on Thanksgiving Eve. I'm glad to be with you, very glad to be with you. I've got an article here called Thanksgiving Day, The True History, by a gentleman by the name of Fred Foldvary, Foldvary, that I found under Google Scholar. Some of this is going to be repetitive of what you just heard that was from Wikipedia, but that's okay, because it goes with the flow of the article. You need to get the feel of not only what he's saying, but how he's saying it, I think. The Pilgrims landed in 1620 and founded the colony of New Plymouth in what is now Massachusetts. They had a difficult first winter, but survived with the help of the Indians. A little different from the story of having a large bounty. Actually, the Indians provided a lot of the food for the first event. There was indeed a big feast in 1621, but it was not a Thanksgiving Day. This 3-day feast was described in a letter by the colonist Edward Winslow. It was a hunting party with the Indians, but there was no Thanksgiving Day proclamation, nor any mention of a Thanksgiving in 1621 in any historical record. So that would appear to refute what we have in Wikipedia. The history of the colony was chronicled by Governor William Bradford in his book of Plymouth Plantation, available at many libraries. Bradford relates how the Pilgrims set up a communist system in which they owned the land in common and would also share the harvests in common. By 1623, it became clear this system was not working out well. The men were not eager to work in the fields, since if they worked hard, they would have to share their produce with everyone else. The colonists faced another year of poor harvest. They held a meeting to decide what to do. As Governor Bradford describes it, at last, after much debate of things, the governor gave way that they should set corn, every man for his own particular. That had very good success, for it made all hands very industrious. So much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been. The Pilgrims changed their economic system from communism to individual enterprise. The land was still owned in common and could not be sold or inherited, but each family was allocated a portion, and they could keep whatever they grew. The governor assigned to every family a parcel of land according to the proportion of their number for that end. Bradford wrote that their experience taught them that for society as a whole, communism, where sharing all the production was vain and a failure. This is 1623, folks. 1623. Their new incentive-based economic system was a great success. It looked like they would have an abundant harvest this time. But then, during the summer, the rain stopped, threatening the crops. The Pilgrims held a day of humiliation and prayer. The rains came and the harvest was saved. It is logical to surmise that the Pilgrims saw this as a sign from God, bless their new economic system, because Governor Bradford proclaimed November 29th, 1623, as a day of thanksgiving. The great economics lesson was forgotten and then discarded by the time the Plymouth colony merged with the Massachusetts Bay colony in 1691. The Pilgrims recognized that the land itself would be their common community property, but that it is proper for the fruits of the labor of each person and family to belong to those who produced them. This was the great economics lesson about incentives that the Pilgrims learned, a lesson that so impressed them that they commemorated it every year thereafter with a day of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day should be remembered not just as a day when we give thanks for our abundance, but more deeply and historically why we have this abundance. In our Thanksgiving Day celebrations, let us therefore tell one another the true origins of the Thanksgiving and the great economic lesson that the Pilgrims hoped we would remember. I found that very interesting, and I thought you would too. The next thing I found was on About.com. The title of the article is How FDR Changed Thanksgiving, by a young lady by the name of Jennifer Rosenberg. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt had a lot to think about in 1939. The world had been suffering from the Great Depression for a decade, and the Second World War had just erupted in Europe. On top of that, the U.S. economy continued to look bleak. So when U.S. retailers begged him to move Thanksgiving up a week to increase the shopping days before Christmas, he agreed. He probably considered it a small change. However, when FDR issued his Thanksgiving proclamation with the new date, there was an uproar throughout the country. The article also acknowledges that the first Thanksgiving was about a successful harvest in 1621. It goes on to talk about sporadic Thanksgivings were held thereafter, after 1621. The very first National Day of Thanksgiving was held in 1789. So 1789 is the first time that there was a Thanksgiving celebrated in all of the states at the time, all the colonies. Yet even after a National Day of Thanksgiving was declared in 1789, Thanksgiving was not an annual celebration. There's a lady that's known as the Mother of Thanksgiving. Her name is Sarah Josepha Hale. That's probably not a name that you're familiar with, but I know that everyone is familiar with her most famous work. She's the lady that wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb. She also was an early day blogger. She published newsletters when something fired her up, or she had an idea or something that she wanted to express. She put it into a newsletter and circulated it. Very early on. It doesn't give the dates. But it says we owe the modern concept of Thanksgiving to a woman named Sarah Josepha Hale, editor of Godey's Ladies Book and author of the famous Mary Had a Little Lamb nursery rhyme. She spent 40 years advocating for a national annual Thanksgiving holiday. In the years leading up to the Civil War, she saw the holiday as a way to infuse hope and belief in the nation and the Constitution. So when the United States was torn in half during the Civil War and Lincoln was searching for a way to bring the nation together, he discussed the matter with Miss Hale. On October 3rd, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued a Thanksgiving proclamation that declared the last Thursday of November based on Washington's date, to be a day of thanksgiving and praise for the first time. Thanksgiving became a national annual holiday with a specific date. For 75 years after that, Lincoln issued his Thanksgiving proclamation. Succeeding presidents honored the tradition and annually issued their own Thanksgiving proclamation, declaring the last Thursday of November as the day of Thanksgiving. However, in 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt did not. In 1939, the last Thursday was going to be too close. It was November the 30th, too close to Christmas, was not allowing the merchants enough time to sell their Christmas wares because they previously had respected Thanksgiving and not started their Christmas sales until after Thanksgiving. As you'll note, most of that still goes on today. It is a tradition that is carried forward. We'll learn more about it in the second half. The due date for Thanksgiving caused a lot of confusion. Calendars were now incorrect. Schools who had planned vacations and tests now had to reschedule. And Thanksgiving, this is 1939, and prior to that, in the 1800s as well, Thanksgiving had been a big day for football games, as it is today. So the game schedules had to be examined, and it caused a lot of havoc and a lot of problems. Political opponents of FDR and many others questioned the president's right to change the holiday and stressed the breaking of precedent and disregard for tradition. Many believe that changing a cherished holiday just to appease businesses was not a sufficient reason for change. Atlantic City's mayor derogatorily called November 23rd as Franksgiving. And actually, in that year, FDR and the Democrats celebrated Thanksgiving on the 23rd, and a lot of Republicans celebrated it on the originally intended last Thursday, which was the 30th. So there was that great a divide back then that moving this sacred holiday caused a rift between the two. I wish that I made the statement earlier that we weren't going to use any of our live foghorn leghorn. We were going to make this a fairly, I don't want to say somber occasion, but serious occasion. And we're going to keep to that. But that going back to the Democrats and the Republicans celebrating Thanksgiving on a separate day causes one to think that
there's something going on around here that just don't add up.
And that things never change. Hopefully, the second half of the show, if the first half hasn't, the second half of the show should really help uplift you. It'll give you information that I found totally interesting, and I think you will too. And it will give you a real solid foundation for what Thanksgiving truly means and what praising God and having a religious aspect to the holiday is all about. And it's not about what people who disagree with that aspect would have you think it's about. There is a thing called civil religion in the United States. I grew up with it. I think a lot of you grew up with it. We didn't know what it was called. We just knew it was there. And this final article that we're going to reference and read, and it's the only thing we're going to spend 30 minutes on, is an excellent piece of work that tells us how we started feeling that way, why it is okay to feel that way, and why we should continue to feel that way. So We will come back out of the break with our standard Charlie Daniels rock and roll. The country needs more rednecks. And we will dive into something that I think Mr. Daniels would greatly approve of. You're listening to Doc Owen. It's Thanksgiving Eve in 2013, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks. Whole fabric of American life, including the political sphere. This public religious dimension is expressed in a set of beliefs, symbols, and rituals that I am calling American civil religion. The inauguration of a president is an important ceremonial event in this religion. It reaffirms, among other things, the religious legitimation of the highest political authority. Thanksgiving Day celebration, as we'll go on to learn from this author, is also one of those higher religious cultural callings of the United States of America. We give you an idea about the idea of civil religion. What is it about? The phrase civil religion is, of course, Rousseau's, who was a renowned philosopher. In his book, The Social Contract, he outlines the simple dogmas of the civil religion: the existence of God, the life to come, the reward of virtue, and the punishment of vice, and the exclusion of religious intolerance. All other religious opinions are outside the cognizance of the state and may be freely held by citizens. So there are some basic religious tenets put forth by this author that have nothing to do with the practice of religion. They're just basic God-given tenets that we all need to understand and agree to. The existence of God, the life to come, the reward of virtue, and the punishment of vice, and the exclusion of religious intolerance. In my humble opinion, those are well worth remembering. Let's go back to Kennedy for a minute. Kennedy's inaugural pointed to the religious aspect of the Declaration of Independence, and it might be well to look at that document a bit more closely. There are 4 references to God. The first speaks of the laws of nature and of nature's God that entitled any people to be independent. The second is the famous statement that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Here Jefferson is locating the fundamental legitimacy of the new nation in a conception of higher law that is itself based on both classical natural law and biblical religion. The third is an appeal to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, and the last indicates a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. In these last 2 references, a biblical God of history who stands in judgment over the world is indicated. Those 4 references are in the Constitution. But the civil religion was not openly accepted. In the minds of Franklin, Washington, Jefferson, and other leaders, with the exception of a few radicals, it was never felt to be a substitute for Christianity. There was an implicit but quite clear division of function between the civil religion and Christianity. In other words, it was a religious or God-empowered, supreme being-empowered way of expressing the fact that all men are created equal. That's not singularly a Christian belief. I mean, that's a from where our founders, our leaders, and a lot of people today, that comes to you. You've got that, whether you wind up being involved in religion or a Christian or whatever, though you have certain inalienable rights. They stress that. That's very much a part of Thanksgiving Day. You're not just saying thank you for the big turkey. Speaking of that, we're going to break for turkey. This is Doc Owen. You're listening to the Thanksgiving Eve show. Be back in a minute. Welcome back, folks. This is Doc Owen. You're listening to our Thanksgiving Eve broadcast, and we are talking about the history of Thanksgiving celebrations, where they came from, how we got here, and the true meaning of the day. When we left before the break, we were reading from an article called Civil Religion in America by Robert Bellah, B-E-L-L-A-H. You can get additional information on the reference by listening to the podcast. We're going to continue with that article and close out with it probably. Let's go back to the Washington's first inaugural address, of April the 30th, 1789. This is a quote. It would be peculiarly improper to omit in this first official act my fervent supplications to that Almighty Being who rules over the universe, who presides in the councils of nations, and whose providential aids can supply every defect, that his benediction may consecrate to the liberties and happiness of the people of the United States a government instituted by themselves for these essential purposes, and may enable every instrument employed in its administration to execute with success the functions allotted to his charge. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the inevitable hand which conducts the affairs of man more than those of the United States. Every step by which we have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token providential agency. He went on to say, he being President Washington, the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained. The preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered, perhaps as deeply as finally staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. Nor did these religious sentiments remain merely the personal expression of the President. At the request of both houses of Congress, Washington proclaimed on October 3rd of that same first year as President that November 26th should be a day of public thanksgiving and prayer, the first Thanksgiving Day under the Constitution. So, 1621 to 1789. What is that? Roughly 168 years. Right? Right. That's how much water ran under the bridge before Thanksgiving Day, and all it meant was actually proclaimed by the President as a national day to give thanks and prayer for what we have, this thing called the American experiment. It had carried forward that long. The words and acts of the Founding Fathers, especially the first few presidents, shaped the form and tone of the civil religion as it has been maintained ever since. Though much is selectively derived from Christianity, this religion is clearly not itself Christianity. For one thing, neither Washington, nor Adams, nor Jefferson mentions Christ in his inaugural address, nor do any of the subsequent presidents, although not one of them fails to mention God. This is a very unique and subtle distinction, but it is mandatory that we understand it, that we embody it, and that we know how to support this argument, if you will, or this concept. It's not an easy thing to understand, but it is. I was really happy to find this article. It's really critical to not just Thanksgiving Day, but the entire gist of what we're doing on the Doc Owens Show. Okay, this is talking about the God of the evil religion is not only rather Unitarian, he is also on the austere side of the civil religion. My bad. Much more related to order, law, and right than to salvation and love. Even though he is somewhat deist in caste, he is by no means simply a watchmaker God. He is actively interested and involved in history with a special concern for America. Here the analogy has much less to do with natural law than with ancient Israel. The equation of America with Israel in the idea of the American Israel is not infrequent. This is going all the way back to George Washington, folks. What was implicit in the words of Washington already quoted becomes explicit in Jefferson's second inaugural when he said, "I shall need too the favor of that being in whose hands we are, who led our fathers as Israel of old from their native land and planted them in a country flowing with all the necessaries and comforts of life." The analogy was Europe is Egypt, America the promised land. God has led his people to establish a new sort of social order that shall be a light unto all the nations. This theme, too, has been a continuous one in the civil religion. We have already alluded to it in the case of the Kennedy inaugural. We find it again in President Johnson's inaugural address. What we have then from the earliest years of the Republic is a collection of beliefs, symbols, and rituals with respect to sacred things and institutionalized in a collectivity. You following me? Until the Civil War, the American civil religion focused above all on the event of the Revolution, which was seen as the final act of the exodus from the old lands across the waters. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were the sacred scriptures, and Washington, the divinely appointed Moses, who led his people out of the hands of tyranny. So that you see the analogies that this author is drawing, and it works for me. I think it'll work for a lot of people. I think it has an awful lot of meaning. The author goes on to say, just as Thanksgiving Day, which incidentally was securely institutionalized as an annual national holiday only under the presidency of Lincoln, serves to integrate the family into the civil religion. So Memorial Day was acted to integrate the local community in the national cult, together with the less overtly religious 4th of July and the more minor celebrations of Veterans Day and the birthdays of Washington and Lincoln, which have now been combined. These two holidays provide an annual ritual calendar for the civil religion, that being Thanksgiving Day and Memorial Day. The public school system serves as a particularly important context for the cultic celebration of the civil rituals. Understand this article was written in 1966. I had the opportunity last weekend to go to my 50th high school reunion, which would have made it 1963. We still started our prayer in public school. We still started our day in public school with a prayer. It was part of the civil religion. It was part of the culture of the country. I gathered together with 53 of my classmates out of a total of 74, so that's an excellent turnout for 50 years. And we had a very good time reminiscing and poking fun at each other. That was the intent, was to bring back this feeling from the 60s. The intent of this show is to try to recreate that understanding. Please have a happy Thanksgiving. Celebrate Thanksgiving Day as it was intended. Thank the Lord for His blessings. And praise God for what we have as a country. Keep your eye focused on that. And whatever it is on a day-to-day basis, we can and will get through this.
This is Brigitte Gabrielle from ActForAmerica.org. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Alternative media such as Red State Talk Radio will not fail you. Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. RedStateTalkRadio.com. Lock it in and rip off the knob.
All right, and now we're going to close out with something about the South, a marching ditty written by Mr. Red Skelton, and a poem stated by Mr. John Wayne, the Duke. Enjoy.
General Sherman was leaving Atlanta, 1865. After he burned it down, he was going out I-20. He gets on the Stone Mountain Freeway. He gets just outside of Stone Mountain, got 125,000 Yankee soldiers behind him. They're going by Stone Mountain. Suddenly they hear a voice. And they look up on top of Stone Mountain. There's one lone Confederate soldier standing on top of Stone Mountain, got his saber drawn. And he's talking real nasty to them, saying ugly things to the Yankees. And General Sherman calls a halt to his crowd, and he said, listen, we got to get this guy off here. It's bad public relations for us. Hell, we got CBS News with us, USA Today. Said, who's the toughest man in the outfit? They said, a fellow named Swartz from Minnesota's the toughest man we got. He said, send Swartz up there, get that Confederate off of there. Swartz goes to the top of Stone Mountain. He ain't there 5 minutes, he comes flying off the mountain. Hits and splats right in front of General Sherman. General Sherman said, send 10 men up there. And they send 10 Union soldiers to the top of Stone Mountain. Not a one lives to tell the story. General Sherman said, this is terrible, so we got to do something about this. He said, find the 150 finest men we got in this company and send them up there to get that rebel off the top of that mountain. 150 Union soldiers go to the top of Stone Mountain. Only one lives to tell the story. And he comes back off Stone Mountain, and he's bleeding from every pore of his body. Don't look good at all. And he walks up to General Sherman. General Sherman said, son, what's the story up there? And the soldier said, it's a trick, General Sherman. There's two of them.
hyphen, Webster's dictionary defines, is a symbol used to divide a compound word or a single word. So it seems to me that when a man calls himself an Afro-American, a Mexican-American, Italian-American, an Irish-American, Jewish-American, what he's saying is, I'm a divided American. Well, we all came from other places, different creeds, different races, to form a nation, to become as one. Yet look at the harm a line has done. A simple little line, and yet as divisive as a line can get. A crooked cross the Nazis flew, and the Russian hammer and sickle, too. Time bombs in the lives of man. But none of these could ever fan the flames of hatred faster than the hyphen. The Russian hammer built a wall that locks men's hearts from freedom's call. The crooked cross flew overhead above 20 million tragic dead. Among them, men from this great nation who died for freedom's preservation. A hyphen is a line that's small. It can be a bridge or be a wall. A bridge can save you lots of time. A wall you always have to climb. The road to liberty lies true. The hyphen's use is up to you. Used as a bridge, it can span all the differences of man. Being free in mind and soul should be our most important goal. If you use the hyphen as a wall, you'll make your life mean and small. An American is a special breed whose people came to her in need. They came to her that they might find a world where they'd have peace of mind, where men are equal, and something more, stand taller than they stood before. So you be wise in your decision, and that little line won't cause division. Let's join hands with one another, for in this land each man's your brother. United we stand, divided we fall. We're Americans, and that says it all.
Front row. Time to go. You have been listening to the Doc Owen Show. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. Now go out there this week and take care, pay attention, and God bless.
Bye-bye, folks. God bless.